Imagine, for a moment, the tranquility of a small town in Iowa. The air is crisp, the streets are quiet, and life moves at a pace where everyone knows everyone else. It's a place where families gather, neighbors wave, and the biggest concern is whether the harvest will be good this year. But, in the stillness of June 10, 1912, something unimaginable was about to unfold. The peace would be shattered forever. The Moore family was one of those quiet, unassuming families. Josiah Moore, a respected local businessman, and his wife, Sarah, had 4 children of their own, along with 2 young friends visiting for the night. What was supposed to be a peaceful evening, a gathering of close friends, would soon turn into one of the most horrific tragedies America would ever witness. But what happened that night? How could a family so full of life be wiped out in their sleep? And who could commit such an unspeakable act, hiding in the shadows, undetected by anyone? As we delve into the chilling details of the Villisca Axe Murders, we must ask, what kind of monster hides behind such a facade? That night, as the Moore family slept soundly in their beds, someone crept through the house, a figure cloaked in darkness. Armed with a weapon as simple as it was horrifying, the murderer wielded an axe with terrifying precision. But who was this killer, and what drove them to commit such a brutal, senseless crime? The axe, the very tool used to silence the lives of 6 innocent people, left behind not just a crime scene, but a symbol. It was a weapon of choice that could only have been wielded by someone with a cold, calculating mind. The killer struck while the family slept, each blow more vicious than the last, and then, as if to ensure that the horror would be complete, they covered the victims' faces with sheets. When the police arrived at the scene, they were faced with a nightmare. The Moore family, along with 2 young friends, had been butchered in their sleep. The room was drenched in blood, with signs of an intense struggle, yet, curiously, the killer had left behind no trace. No fingerprints, no footprints, and no sign of forced entry. It was as though the killer had vanished into thin air. How could someone get away with such a brutal crime, and leave behind so few clues? The police were baffled. This wasn't just another random act of violence, it was something far more sinister. The killer had taken meticulous care, covering mirrors in the house, leaving the axe behind, staining it with blood. And yet, despite the brutality of the crime, there were no obvious motives. Was this the work of a serial killer, or something more personal? Could it have been a random drifter, passing through the town, committing this act of terror and leaving no trace behind? In the wake of the murders, the small town of Villisca was left in shock. The killer had taken 8 innocent lives, and there were no clear answers. Rumors swirled. Some believed the murders were connected to a local preacher, Reverend George Kelly, who had been in town at the time. Others speculated that the killings were part of a broader pattern, a traveling murderer who moved from town to town, leaving destruction in his wake. But despite the frantic search for answers, the truth remained elusive. Could a person really walk into a quiet town, commit such a brutal act, and disappear without a trace? Over the years, the mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders has never been fully solved. Several suspects have been named, including Reverend George Kelly, but no one was ever formally charged. The case went cold, and as time passed, the small town of Villisca began to carry the weight of this dark history. The Moore house, now a relic of that night, still stands, a haunting reminder of the lives lost and the questions that remain unanswered. But even as the years go by, the story of the Villisca Axe Murders remains etched in the collective memory of the town. The unanswered questions continue to haunt the people of Villisca, as well as those who hear the tale. What kind of monster could commit such a gruesome crime, and why did it happen? Could the killer have been someone who lived among them? Or was this a stranger, someone who slipped in and out of their lives without leaving a trace? April 14, 2009. A quiet evening, much like any other. A young woman, Julissa Brisman, a 26-year-old massage therapist, arrived at a hotel in Boston. She had an appointment. A job. She believed it would be like any other. Little did she know, the person she was meeting had no intention of paying for a service only to destroy her life. April 14, 2009. A quiet evening, much like any other. A young woman, Julissa Brisman, a 26-year-old massage therapist, arrived at a hotel in Boston. She had an appointment. A job. She believed it would be like any other. Little did she know, the person she was meeting had no intention of paying for a service only to destroy her life. Markoff, with his charming smile and calm demeanor, met Julissa under the guise of a simple business transaction. It seemed innocent, just another encounter from an online ad. But behind Markoff's facade was a calculated predator, waiting in the shadows. How could someone who appeared so normal, so trustworthy, turn into such a monster? Inside the room, the atmosphere was charged with an unnerving stillness. Julissa, unaware of the danger she was walking into, set her bag down, expecting to carry on with the night as she had with many others. But in the dark corners of the room, the air was thick with something else, an inevitability. Markoff didn't just want a massage. He wanted to control, to dominate, and ultimately, to kill. But why? What motivated him to take such a horrific step? Markoff's method was chillingly simple. He'd planned everything meticulously. What started as a simple robbery escalated to something far worse, something irreversible. The first blow was sudden. Quick. A strike of violence that turned the room from a place of business to one of horror. Julissa never stood a chance. The impact was swift. Markoff's first victim didn't scream, she didn't have the chance. The life was drained from her in an instant, and with it, the hope of ever seeing the light of day again. But what Markoff did next, the chilling act of covering her face with a sheet, was an unsettling detail. It wasn't just about silencing her, it was about erasing her existence. Why did he do this? What did it reveal about his state of mind? After Julissa's murder, Markoff's mind was calm, calculating, and eerily detached. He didn't panic. He didn't flee immediately. No, instead, he covered her face, as if to shield her from the violence he had just inflicted. It was as if, by hiding her face, he could erase the reality of his actions. What did he see when he looked at her? Was she just another pawn in his twisted game, or did he view her as something to be controlled, subdued? As the hours passed, the scene remained frozen in time. The police would later find the hotel room in disarray, blood splattered across the walls, the bed undisturbed, save for the sheet. Yet, Markoff had already vanished. By the time the body was discovered, the killer was long gone, his plan executed with chilling precision. And still, the question lingered, why did he choose this path? Markoff's next move was just as cold. He didn't flee the scene in panic, he was methodical. He knew that Julissa's murder would make the headlines, but he also knew that time was on his side. The law would have to work hard to piece together the fragmented clues he'd left behind, and in that time, he'd be free. Free to strike again. But was it a random crime, or did Markoff see Julissa as more than just a victim? His calm demeanor and deliberate actions suggested something darker at play, something premeditated. Was he addicted to the control? The power? And if so, How long before he'd kill again? What began with one life taken in a hotel room would spiral into something far darker. The question that lingered in the minds of investigators was no longer just who did it. It became, why did he do it? And what was his ultimate goal? Was he just a desperate man, or something far more insidious? What would it take to stop him before he struck again? It's said that the most dangerous predators are the ones who blend in, the ones who move through the world unnoticed, undetected, until it's far too late. Philip Markoff did just that. For every woman he lured through Craigslist, for every meeting he set up under the guise of a simple transaction, he was one step closer to satisfying his dark cravings. One act of violence wasn't enough. Markoff wanted more. And with each new victim, his control tightened. At first, it was simple. The transaction was supposed to be straightforward. Markoff was looking for companionship, and the women on Craigslist were looking to make money. But Markoff didn't want to pay for anything. He didn't want a date, a massage, or even casual conversation. What he craved was something darker. And it didn't take long before his desire for power and control led him to escalate. His first victim, Julissa Brisman, wasn't the last. Each subsequent meeting carried the same unsettling familiarity, luring women into false senses of safety, promising money for a job, and then quickly turning the situation into something far more sinister. And yet, Markoff didn't seem concerned with getting caught. Why? What was it about this game he was playing that gave him such confidence? Was it the thrill of the hunt? Or was there something even darker at play? In the case of his second victim, a woman who narrowly escaped his clutches, the police finally had something to work with, a description. She had been bound, threatened with a gun, but managed to break free. Her escape was a pivotal moment in the investigation, as it was the first concrete evidence that linked Markoff to the crimes. But even with this lead, the authorities struggled to make the connection. Who was this man? Why was he doing this? And why did he seem to slip through the cracks so easily? The police, now with a description, began the long process of narrowing down their suspects. Markoff, for all his coldness, had left behind some telling clues. Surveillance footage from nearby stores showed him walking through public areas unassuming, almost ordinary. He blended in with the crowd so perfectly, it seemed impossible that this man could be the one behind such brutal acts. But sometimes, that's what makes the most dangerous predators those who hide in plain sight, waiting for their next victim. But even as the investigation gained momentum, Markoff continued to act with impunity. He was a man on a mission, focused, calculating, detached. The thrill of the hunt was enough to sustain him. With each encounter, he grew bolder. What had once started as simple robberies escalated into a deadly spree, one that could only end when someone finally caught him. But would they? And if so, what would they find? Markoff had entered a dangerous cycle, one that became harder and harder to break. He wasn't just after money. He wasn't even just after power. There was something more, a deeper craving. Was it the control he felt when his victims were helpless? Or was it something far darker, rooted in a place that few could ever understand? Whatever the reason, he wasn't stopping, and he wasn't scared. What was it about these meetings that fed Markoff's insatiable hunger for control? Was it the power he wielded over these women? Or was it simply that he enjoyed the fear, the uncertainty in their eyes? For someone so cold, so composed, it was as though every encounter was just another game, each new victim, a piece in a puzzle only he could understand. As Markoff continued his spree, the investigation intensified. The police had no clear leads, but they had a crucial piece of the puzzle, a survivor who had managed to escape. Her testimony would be the key that finally led them to Markoff. The question was, would it be enough to catch him before it was too late? The clock was ticking, and Markoff's facade was starting to crack. But could the police catch him before he struck again? Or would the darkness he so expertly concealed remain hidden forever? The noose was slowly tightening. Despite his cold demeanor, Philip Markoff was not invincible. The calm exterior he had so carefully cultivated was starting to crack under the weight of his escalating crimes. What began as a series of carefully planned robberies had spiraled into an uncontrollable spree. The question now was, when would he slip up? And could the police catch him before he disappeared into the darkness again? The breakthrough came when Markoff's last victim, a young woman named Morgan, managed to escape. The attacker Markoff had bound her, assaulted her, and nearly killed her. But in a split second of sheer will, Morgan broke free. Her eyes were full of fear, but there was something else: determination. She escaped into the night, leaving behind one crucial piece of evidence, a detailed description of her attacker. For the first time, the police had a clear lead. Morgan's detailed description of Markoff was everything they needed to connect him to the other crimes. She described him as a medical student, his calm, polite demeanor, the way he'd spoken to her before attacking. It wasn't just the physical appearance that matched, it was the behavior. The calculated, deliberate nature of his actions. The police had their suspect. But would they find him before he could strike again? Markoff's arrest was swift, almost anticlimactic. After the description given by Morgan, the authorities began to close in. A warrant was issued, and a manhunt ensued. The irony was that for a man who had so carefully concealed his dark side, it was his own lack of fear, his overconfidence, that ultimately led to his capture. On May 1, 2009, Markoff was arrested in a hotel lobby. The man who had been living a double life, the promising medical student and the ruthless predator, was now in handcuffs. He stood there, almost numb, as the weight of his crimes began to sink in. For the first time, he was not in control. He was the one being controlled. What was going through Markoff's mind as he was led away? Did he feel the weight of the lives he had taken, or was he still detached from the horror he had inflicted? In a case like this, the psychology of the killer becomes just as important as the evidence itself. Markoff's ability to carry on as if nothing had happened, to look normal despite the atrocities he'd committed, spoke to a chilling lack of empathy. But perhaps even more disturbing was the realization that he had been hiding in plain sight all along. In the wake of Markoff's arrest, the media frenzy began. The news spread like wildfire. The charming, well-liked medical student who had been living a double life was now revealed to be a cold-blooded killer. The question on everyone's mind was, how could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such heinous acts? How could a person wear a mask of normalcy, fooling everyone around them, while hiding such a violent, twisted nature? But Markoff's arrest was just the beginning. The true weight of his actions was about to be fully revealed. In the courtroom, Markoff would be forced to confront the families of his victims. The question now was, what would the trial reveal about the man behind the mask? Was he just a man who snapped, or was he something far more sinister, a predator hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Markoff's trial began in 2010, and the details of his crimes were laid bare. His chilling calmness in the face of such horrific actions sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Yet, even in the face of such undeniable proof, Markoff's demeanor remained unchanged. No remorse. No regret. Only a cold, calculating man who had never truly been moved by the suffering he caused. In the end, Philip Markoff was convicted of first-degree murder, robbery, and other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But before he could even begin serving his sentence, he was found dead in his prison cell. Authorities ruled it a suicide, but the unanswered questions surrounding his death only added to the mystery of the Craigslist Killer. Markoff's story didn't end with his conviction. His death raised even more questions. Did he take his own life to avoid facing the consequences of his crimes, or was there more to the story? In the end, Markoff's life, like his crimes, ended abruptly, leaving behind a trail of terror, unanswered questions, and a haunting legacy. The trial of Philip Markoff was nothing short of a spectacle, a courtroom drama where justice collided with chilling indifference. The man who had once been seen as the charming, bright medical student was now facing the consequences of his unimaginable crimes. The case became one of the most infamous in American history, as the public was forced to confront a horrific reality. A seemingly ordinary man was capable of such brutality. As the trial began, the evidence against Markoff was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a clear case. He had used Craigslist to lure women into dangerous situations, pretending to be a paying client seeking companionship. What followed was a series of brutal attacks, robberies, assaults, and in one tragic case, murder. His cold, calculated approach to these acts left no doubt in the minds of the jury. But perhaps the most chilling detail was his lack of remorse. But even as the evidence stacked up against him, Markoff's demeanor remained unchanged. He showed no signs of remorse. No tears. No apologies. His expression remained neutral, almost blank, as if the weight of the lives he had destroyed had never crossed his mind. In the face of such overwhelming proof, why did he remain so detached? Was this coldness a defense mechanism, or was it simply who he was? The victims' families were not silent during the trial. They stood in the courtroom, their grief palpable as they confronted the man who had taken their loved ones from them. Their voices rang out in the courtroom, demanding justice, their anger and sorrow filling the room. For them, this trial wasn't just about Markoff's guilt, it was about closure. About finding justice for the lives he had stolen. As the trial continued, the shocking details of Markoff's crimes were laid bare for the world to see. He was not just a killer, he was a predator, calculated, methodical, and terrifyingly detached. The court heard how he had carefully planned each attack, how he had used charm and deception to lure his victims. It became clear that his actions weren't the result of a crime of passion, they were the result of something far darker, a deep, unsettling need for control. As the jury deliberated, the nation watched. This wasn't just a trial about one man's horrific actions, it was a trial about the darkness that could lie hidden beneath even the most seemingly perfect exteriors. Could someone so ordinary, so unassuming, really be capable of such evil? And if he could be hiding in plain sight, what did that mean for the rest of us? In the end, Markoff was found guilty of first-degree murder, robbery, and other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in emotion, tears of relief and sorrow for the families, knowing that the man who had destroyed their lives would never be free again. But the trial wasn't the end of Markoff's story. Markoff's death came in 2010, just months after his conviction. He was found dead in his prison cell. The authorities ruled it a suicide, but many questioned whether this was the true end of the story. Was it justice? Or was it Markoff's way of avoiding the punishment he so rightly deserved? The mystery surrounding his death only deepened the darkness of his legacy. In the end, Philip Markoff's story serves as a chilling reminder. He was a man who seemed to have everything: youth, charm, a promising career ahead of him, but it was all just a facade. Beneath that mask, he was a predator, and his darkness was only revealed once it was far too late. He may have been caught, convicted, and even died in prison, but the haunting questions remain. Why did he do it? What made him snap? And how many others like him are out there, hiding in plain sight? The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered, and Philip Markoff was behind bars, his fate sealed. But as the dust settled, something more unsettling lingered in the air: the unresolved questions. The chilling truth that, even with Markoff in custody, there were pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. How could someone like him, a man who appeared so ordinary, be capable of such brutality? What made him snap? Was it his upbringing, his psychology, or something far darker that drove him to commit his horrific acts? The public, still reeling from the shock of Markoff's crimes, struggled to make sense of it all. His double life had been so well crafted that no one saw it coming. He was the smiling medical student, the classmate who helped others, the charming young man who seemed to have everything going for him. And yet, lurking beneath that polished image, was a predator, methodical, and cold. What was it about Markoff that allowed him to hide this darkness for so long? What drove him to believe that he could get away with it? Many theories have been put forth in the years since Markoff's capture. Some believe he was a psychopath, others suspect he had a deep-rooted need for control and power. But could there have been something more? Some have speculated that Markoff's actions were not just about satisfying his own desires. Was he seeking to prove something? Was he testing the boundaries of what he could get away with? These questions remain unanswered, leaving the world to wonder about the true nature of his crimes. Even in death, Markoff's legacy continued to haunt. His prison cell suicide in 2010, officially ruled as such, left many questions unanswered. Was it truly suicide, or did Markoff somehow find a way to escape the consequences of his actions one final time? His death added yet another layer of mystery to his already unsettling life. For the families of his victims, the finality of his death did little to bring them peace. Their loved ones were gone, and no amount of justice could bring them back. Markoff's story didn't just end with his conviction or his death. His actions have become part of a broader conversation about the dangers of the internet and the hidden threats that lurk in everyday life. The rise of online marketplaces like Craigslist has opened doors for both legitimate services and, tragically, criminal activities. Markoff's use of Craigslist to lure his victims was a reflection of the growing dangers of anonymity in the digital age. It begs the question, how safe are we when the world is increasingly interconnected, but the people behind screens remain hidden? The story of the Craigslist killer has not just left scars on the families of his victims. It has shaped the way we view the dangers that come with the digital age. Markoff's ability to hide in plain sight, posing as a normal, promising student while secretly hunting his victims, is a reminder of just how deceptive appearances can be. He wasn't the monster we expected, he was the one we overlooked. And for the people of Boston, Markoff's crimes have become part of the city's dark history. The memories of those he victimized, the fear that rippled through the community, and the unanswered questions about why he did it all continue to haunt the streets. The case of the Craigslist killer may be closed, but the legacy of what he did, of the lives he destroyed, remains very much alive in the minds of those who were affected. In the end, what is left of Philip Markoff? A man who seemed to have everything: youth, opportunity, and a future, yet destroyed it all in pursuit of something darker. He is a man who slipped through the cracks of society, hidden in plain sight. His story is a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones we least suspect. And as we reflect on his crimes, we must ask ourselves, could this happen again? Who is hiding behind the mask of normalcy? As the final chapter of Philip Markoff's story closed with his conviction and death, the lingering question that no one could shake remained: why? What drove this young man, with everything to live for, to commit such cold and methodical acts of violence? The empty space left in his wake is filled with more questions than answers. His name forever etched in history as the Craigslist Killer, his victims' lives forever altered by a man who seemed so ordinary. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Markoff's story is that he was never fully understood. There are no easy explanations. Was he simply a product of his circumstances? Or was he a pure example of evil that wore the mask of an everyday man? Perhaps the answer doesn't lie in the events themselves, but in the silence left after he was caught. His death in prison only added to the enigma. Was it truly suicide, or did someone help him escape his fate in the most permanent way possible? For the families of Markoff's victims, justice may have been served, but it came at a horrific price. The pain, the grief, and the devastation of losing a loved one to such violence is something that no conviction could ever erase. The killer may have been caught, but the scars he left behind are permanent, a reminder of how fragile life can be, and how even the most seemingly normal individuals can hide darkness within. The legacy of Markoff's crimes extends beyond the courtroom or the prison cell where his life ended. It's a stark reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places. The chilling truth is that, even in a world that values appearances, we are never fully safe. Markoff's story serves as a warning: never underestimate the darkness that hides behind the most ordinary of facades. So, what do we take away from this story? What have we learned from the rise and fall of the Craigslist Killer? Perhaps it's that the dangers of the modern world are not always visible at first glance. Trust and deception can be manipulated, and innocence can be an illusion. We must always be aware of the hidden risks around us, and remember that sometimes the scariest predators are the ones we least expect. And so, the haunting tale of Philip Markoff lives on. His story will never be forgotten, not because of the notoriety he sought, but because of the lives he destroyed. His darkness serves as a lasting reminder of the fragility of life and the chilling reality that some monsters wear the most ordinary of masks. If you found the story of Philip Markoff as unsettling as we did, we encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the world around you. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and never let your guard down. Subscribe to Crime in Review for more true crime stories and follow us as we continue to explore the darkest corners of human nature. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes, the most terrifying truths lie hidden in plain sight.